Joining me now is the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. Thanks for your time, Premier.
Thank you, Lee.
Death is always a difficult conversation and people don't like talking about it. But given that the New South Wales strategy is clearly to tolerate a particular number of cases and deaths and lift lockdown as soon as possible, how many deaths a day should the public be prepared for?
Lee, can I make clear that we don't want to tolerate any deaths, but we appreciate that when you're in the middle of a pandemic, when you have an unvaccinated population, unfortunately, death is going to be a consequence. And our job, whilst we get those high vaccination rates, is to keep people safe and well and keep them out of hospital. And that's why we do have those strict lockdowns in place to buy ourselves time to get those vaccination rates up.
I mean, once you lift lockdowns, how many deaths?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, what we're attempting to do is make sure that those most vulnerable are vaccinated, those obviously who are more susceptible to COVID are vaccinated, so it reduces the likelihood of people getting into hospital and dying. And we know, Lee, again, no death is acceptable, no death is easy, but we know that outside of COVID, we lose 600 to 800 people a year in New South Wales because of the flu. Our job is to give information to the community and prevent the loss of life as much as possible.
But in terms of giving information to the community, you have to be honest and try to prepare people. You mentioned flu deaths. I've got some data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics looking at causes of death in Australia, and these come from 2019. On average, there are 49 deaths a day from heart disease, 27 from stroke, 9 from suicide. Surely you've done some sort of modelling on what COVID deaths would look like after lockdown, because otherwise how do you prepare your hospital resources?
Well, look, we know now that the rate of hospitalisation in New South Wales from all the cases is around 5.5%. So, but that again will change depending on how many people we get vaccinated. And we do have to accept, unfortunately, that people will succumb. But I wish I had every single scenario in which people will succumb. And we've seen also that randomly, because of the Delta strain, some people who are of a different demographic, a different age group from those most vulnerable are also succumbing. And that's why vaccination rates are so important.
But Premier, I just want things to be as clear for the public as possible, because as you know, people are pretty stretched, right? And they just want to know what life ahead might look like. So if we look at the examples overseas, you look at Canada, it has about 2,200 cases a day and 9 deaths. Its population's about 10 million bigger than Australia. Is that the kind of ballpark figure Australia should be thinking we're going to be seeing if we open at this 70-80% lockdown, somewhere around 10 deaths a day?
Well, look, it really depends on what the case numbers are doing at that stage as well, Lee. I'd love to be able to give you a definite ballpark, but that will depend on where the cases are up to. It will depend on which proportion of which demographics are vaccinated. Clearly, we'd love everybody over the age of 70 to be already vaccinated, because we know it impacts in particular those older Australians. We want to make sure that those in vulnerable Indigenous communities are completely vaccinated.
We've heard other state premiers, notably Dan Andrews and Mark McGowan, say that there's no living with COVID and that zero COVID is still viable. Why do you disagree?
Because it's completely unrealistic. I don't know any state or nation on the planet who abides by those rules. It's just not possible. We can't pretend we're extra special or very different from other places. And having said that, Lee, whilst I know the numbers in New South Wales are greater than we've seen before in Australia, to have a reproductive rate, or the R rate at 1.3, is doing reasonably well, given in most countries it's around 7 to 9. So we are seeing us able to maintain the virus to an extent whilst we get those vaccination rates up. But to suggest that living with Delta means zero cases is completely unrealistic. It's not happened anywhere else in the world.
But how does the national opening plan hold up when you're keen to let your public out of lockdown with cases circulating, but other states are not?
Well, look, the national plan said that once we get to 70% double dose vaccination, that there are certain things that we can do whilst we're still suppressing the virus, but obviously give our community freedoms. And obviously once you get to 80% double dose, that gives your community greater freedom still. Even a state that's had zero cases for a long time is going to have to open up its borders eventually. And whenever that happens, and whenever that is, you're going to see an influx of cases. That's just how the virus works. No amount of government intervention or lockdown is going to get you to 0 cases.
People have a whole range of views on lockdowns and COVID. Let me ask you to respond to a couple of them at the different extremes. The first is that there are people in other states who are boiling with fury at you, believing the whole reason Australia is in lockdown again is because you didn't do a hard lockdown the second the limo driver had put the Delta variant into circulation. That is indisputable now, isn't it?
Well, no, I think there's no perfect way of dealing with the pandemic, and I'm very comfortable in being held accountable. I'm very comfortable in people criticising, because no matter what decision you take, when it's uncharted territory, you're going to attract criticism.
But it wasn't, Premier, sorry, it wasn't uncharted territory. We knew already that the Delta strain was highly infectious from what was going on overseas. We knew that it was kind of different to what had happened before.
Although we also knew what mechanisms we could use to suppress the virus before then. So, and with all due respect, even in Victoria, where they went into hard lockdown, some would say earlier than we did, they're still seeing an escalation of cases. So there is no assurance that a hard lockdown or the intention of a short lockdown is going to get you back down to where you want to be. We have to accept that in the Australian context, we had not seen community transmission of Delta and been able to see what works and what doesn't. But what we do know is the rate of transmissibility, the contagiousness of it, and the way it affects all demographics really means that vaccination is key. And we've been saying that from day one. Even prior to the outbreak, we were saying how important vaccination rates were.
Given that, have you had words to the Prime Minister, given that the whole reason that this took off was because vaccination was about 2 months behind schedule?
Look, it's really important for us to make sure we provide our community with every safety we can, and that includes vaccination. And
but have you had words to the PM about that?
Oh, I've done so in National Cabinet, and I've done so publicly. I've done so in all forums. I think my records have been pretty clear on the public record. My comments have been pretty clear about where I stand with vaccination.
Let me ask you about a view at the other extreme, which is, what do you say to citizens who believe that the trade-off of lockdowns is too high, that the cost to children's educations, the community's mental health and the lives of just about everyone under 60 are too extreme?
Look, I appreciate there are views at either end about being too hard and too soft, and these are going to continue no matter what my government does or any other government does. But it's really important to have that balanced approach. It's really important to know what works and what doesn't, not to burden your citizens unless you absolutely have to, and also to provide realistic expectations of what citizens can expect. So I agree with both of those ends of the spectrum. You do need to suppress the virus as much as you can. You do need to see if you can reduce the case numbers, but at the same time, you need to be real about it. But I wish there was an easier way to say we're going to have 0 cases, no deaths, and then somehow get to 100% vaccination. That's not the real world. We just need to look at what's happened overseas, and our path is different. A lot of countries had thousands of cases a day, got their vaccination rates up, and now have seen reduction in hospitalisation.
What it all boils down to, what people want to know is, when are we going to be out of this situation? On the current pace of vaccination, when do you think the first easing of restrictions will occur in New South Wales?
Well, I'd always promised our citizens that during September there'd be one extra thing they can do so long as we hit the 6 million jabs by the end of August. So there'll be at least one extra thing our citizens can do next month in September.
And what's that likely to be? What
plan,
kind of a thing?
Well, our health experts are working on that. So we've consulted the chief psychiatrist, as well as those that support our economy. Obviously, public health and safety comes first, and mental wellbeing. So we will have that advice to the community as soon as we can. But in relation to when we can live life more freely, well, if you follow the Doherty plan, it says 70% double dose vaccination. New South Wales looks to be hitting that target by the end of October. I hope we'll get there faster, but it looks like it'll be the end of October. And in relation to 80% double dose vaccination, if we keep the current rates up, New South Wales will get to that target in the middle of November.
Premier, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Lee.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.